On the worst storm of the year, an old man named Arthur signed away every last thing he owned and slid the papers across the table to the son, who was already planning to throw him out. The rain was so loud on the tin roof, he had to press down hard just to hear his own pen scratch. His hand shook as he set the pen down, and he told himself it was only the cold. Derek took the deed, gave his warm and easy smile, and swore his father would be cared for until his very last day. Remember that smile. The same storm would carry it all the way back to Derek, down to the last cold raindrop. To understand how a gentleman ends up with nothing, you have to go back to before the rain. For 40 years, Arthur fixed shoes at a little stall on the corner of the market. His hands always smelled of leather and polish, and the whole market knew the soft tap of his little hammer. He charged the poor half price and the proud ones full, and he always remembered which was which. He saved every coin that didn't go to food. First it paid for his wife's medicine, and after she was gone it went toward one quiet dream. Every night he shook that can once, just to hear how close the dream had come. He wanted to leave his boy a paid-off house and enough money that Derek would never have to bow to anyone. Derek grew up clever and charming, the kind of man who could talk the shirt off your back and have you thank him for it. He drove a car he couldn't afford and wore the smile of a man who always needed one more favor. Even as a boy, his borrowing never came back, and his father always called it generosity. 2 doors down lived Helen, who ran a small tea shop and remembered every kindness she had ever been shown. Years before, when her shop was about to close, Arthur had quietly covered her overdue rent and refused to ever take a coin of it back. For years, she tried to repay him, and every time he only asked for another cup of her jasmine tea, she never forgot what he had done. "Mr. Arthur," she would say, "there is always a warm room and a bowl of rice at my door. You only have to knock," she told him, and she meant it with her whole heart. Every time, Arthur only smiled and waved the offer away. "I have a son," he would say. "Fathers shouldn't have to lean on strangers." He said it like a man who had never once doubted the ground under his feet. Then one evening, Derek came home with rain on his coat and worry on his face, leading his little boy by the hand. He said a rare chance had come along. Was a business that would triple everything, he said, enough to keep the family safe for 3 generations. He used bright words Arthur didn't understand but wanted to believe. All it needed was real money behind it. Just the house and the savings, and only for a little while. Arthur hesitated. 40 years of his life lived inside that little house and inside every coin in that can. He looked at the faded photo of his wife and asked her, without words, what he should do. Then Derek lifted his son onto the old man's knee and said, "Do it for him, Father, so he never has to struggle the way you did." That was the one door in his heart Derek always knew how to open. His father could refuse him anything in the world except that small boy. So on a long rainy night, Arthur signed over the deed to his house and poured a lifetime of savings into his son's open hands. He pressed the empty tin can into Derek's hands, too, and joked that the dream had finally grown up. Derek kissed his father's forehead, called him the best man he had ever known, and carried it all out into the storm. For a few weeks, the calls came every day, then thinned to once a week. Then they stopped altogether, and the phone sat dark and silent under a film of dust. When Arthur finally took the bus across town to visit, a stranger opened the door of the house that used to be his. A red official seal was pasted on the fence, and a child he had never met played in his old garden. Derek had sold it that same month. The money never touched any business. Went into his debts and his image, into a life that always needed feeding. Even then, Arthur did not give up on his son. He learned where Derek lived now, a tower of glass on the bright side of the city, and he waited outside its doors for hours. When Derek finally came out, he was laughing among men in fine coats with his little son in a smart new suit. Arthur stepped forward with his hat in his hands and softly spoke his son's name. Derek looked straight at his own father and told his friends he had never seen the old beggar before. He told the doorman to keep people like that away from the steps and led his friends off laughing. The little grandson looked back once, confused, before the crowd swallowed him up. Arthur stood a long time on the marble step, holding the little shoes he had mended as a gift, and then he went home. Later, when Arthur called to plead, ashamed and frightened, his son's voice had gone to ice. "You signed it yourself," Derek said. "Stop calling. You're embarrassing me." Then the line went dead, and something inside the old man went quiet with it. Arthur ended up in a single rented room with a ceiling that leaked whenever it rained. He ate cold rice from a chipped bowl and listened to the rain he used to find so peaceful. He mended his own worn shoes by the window and told the landlord his son was away on business. He never once cursed his son out loud. He only grew quieter and a little straighter, the way a man does when he has finally seen the truth and chosen to carry it. Here is the truth about a man who feeds his whole life into a bottomless deal. The deal is always hungrier than he is. The rare chance Derek had chased was someone else's trap run by a man who smiled in the exact same way he did. Derek had once stalked his own father out of a house, and now a smoother voice was talking him out of everything. By the time he saw the trap close, his partner had vanished with all of it, including the money that once lived in an old tin can. The fine house he had bought was seized against his debts. The car was towed before he had finished paying for it. The friends who loved his money found someone new by spring. The doorman who once feared him now waved him off the very steps he used to own. Everything he had taken from his father ran out of his hands as fast as it had run in. Pawned, the expensive watch, and a pale band of bare skin was all it left behind. The inheritance he stole had a current of its own, and it carried him to the very place he had sent the old man. It carried him all the way down to nothing. One night, a man mending shoes on a corner gave him bread, never knowing whose son he was. And on a night when the rain fell, just like it had the night of the signing, Arthur finally did the one thing his pride had refused for years. He stood at the door of a small tea shop, soaked to the bone, and he knocked. Helen opened it before he could even lower his hand. She didn't ask a single question. She pulled him inside and wrapped a dry blanket around his shoulders. Then she set a bowl of hot rice in his shaking hands, the very thing she had promised for 20 years. The favor he had been too proud to take had been waiting at that door the whole time. It turned out to be the only road left that didn't end in the cold. In that warm little room, Arthur finally let himself weep. He wept not for the house and not for the money, but for the son he had lost long before the storm. Months later, a thin man in a soaked and wrinkled suit stood outside that same tea shop, staring in at the warm light. Derek had nowhere left to go. Someone had told him his father was here, alive and somehow warm. Through the glass, he watched his father laugh softly at something Helen said. A blanket on his shoulders and a full bowl in his hands was the life Derek had promised him, and then sold. Now Derek stood on the cold side of the glass, looking in. He knew this feeling, the wet street and the shut door, because he had handed it to his father first. Arthur looked up and saw him standing there. For a moment, the old father's hand lifted toward the door, the way it always used to. Then he remembered the dead phone line and the long months of cold rice eaten alone in a leaking room. He remembered the marble step, too, and the words, "I have never seen this man." His hand came slowly to rest on the table. Then Arthur stood, opened the door himself, and held out a dry blanket to the trembling man who used to be his son. "Come in," he said softly. "No one should be left out in the cold. Not even by family. Especially not by family." Derek dropped to his knees in the doorway and wept like the small child he had once set on his father's knee. The scales of fate always balance. Sometimes they balance with thunder, and sometimes with a quiet bowl of rice handed to the one who deserved it least. Derek spent the rest of his years repaying a debt no money could ever settle, and his father let him, because that was its own kind of mercy. The house could never be bought back, and neither could the 40 years. Justice had arrived, the way it so often does, real and far too late to undo the wound. Arthur passed away 3 winters later, warm with the full bowl beside him and a hand to hold. It was everything he had tried to give his son, and in the end a stranger's open door gave it to him instead. If you believe that what we give to others always finds its way home to us, subscribe to Karma Tales. Stay for the next story about a daughter who shut the door on her mother one freezing winter, and the winter that came looking for her will stay with you.